Go. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call this special council meeting of Monday, February 24th, 2025 to order. And acknowledge that with gratitude that we live and work on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish Nation, whose people have been stewards of these lands and waters around the Pelican Bowen Island for many, many years. And I'd like to just run around the table and introduce everybody that's here. Alex Jurgensen, Councillor Sue Ellen Fast, Councillor Judy Getty, our CAO Karen Dillon, myself, Councillor Allison Morse, and Mayor Andrew Leonard sends his regrets. He is unable to attend this morning. Our corporate officer, Sophia Adesinga, and our guest today, MP Patrick Weiler, and Councillor John Saunders. And on Zoom, we have Councillor Tim Wake. And can I ask for a motion for the approval of the agenda? Is there any late items to add? No late items?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
New business discussion with MP Patrick Weiler. I guess I'll start it off just by saying thank you for all the grants we've had. And maybe later we can give you some info on the ones we've applied for. And you'll see, I hope, that the community center is almost finished. Mm-hmm. Look forward to inviting you to the grand opening. And you probably would have seen some of the multi-use path, and I think we've had some federal monies towards that. So that's the visible things that are there. So over to you.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to join council this morning. And apologies for having to reschedule the last time. Another very important announcement was happening on transit that I needed to be at. So I really appreciate the flexibility of being able to reschedule today. And yeah, actually on the way in, we stopped very briefly to see the community center and how it's coming along, and had a brief chat with somebody that was working there, and sounds like it's getting close to occupancy. Yes. Which will be great, because I know that's going to be a game changer for the community. And certainly the multi-use path and a few of the other projects are important. There was a water project we announced, I guess it was 2 years ago, on the other side of the island, and also the
Blue Water Improvement Water Main project. Right. Thank you.
And also the affordable rental project that's built just along the housing.
Yes.
So one of the things that I did want to touch on at some point is just how things have been going so far through the Housing Accelerator Fund announcement, and what kind of changes that's delivering for the community. I know that's
let me ask the CEO if we could get again, he'll come down and briefly update. Yeah, thank you. Okay. We'll do that. We'll get an update from our planner. We have an agenda item today on our agenda for the process for using community.
Absolutely, because that's absolutely one of the big priorities I know for residents on Bowen, as well as, of course, transportation, and the multi-use path is part of it. Getting better transit on the island is part of it as well, and then better transportation options to and from the island. I had the pleasure of joining Mayor Leonard for an announcement a couple of weeks ago with respect to Green Line ferries. And I understand actually today, the Vancouver Parks Board is going to be considering the motion based on that meeting to determine if they're going to utilize Harbor Green for the Vancouver docking station for that. And I understand the subsequent motion that's being put forward on Vancouver City Council is going to be debated in the coming weeks. I'm not sure exactly which date, but I think a couple of weeks later. So I know that could have another transformative impact on Bowen to provide another transportation option to and from the island, something that will provide reliable service, and also provide service where people wouldn't necessarily have to take their car, which could make a big difference as well. So those are some of the things that are top of mind for me. I'm of course always focused on what's happening internationally right now, which is taking up a lot of oxygen. And but I just really wanted to have this time to connect with council to see what's top of mind for councillors and where I might be able to be of assistance, whether that's existing grants or other issues that are coming up in the community where I could be helpful as your federal representative to help address or make some progress on.
Yeah. And this is Daniel Martin, our Director Manager of Planning and Development, and he's been working with the HAF funds. MP Weiler was asking where we were with and how our progress was on using up all the HAF money we got as a grant. So I just hate to put you on the spot, but can you give a little 5-minute summary of what we've done?
Yeah, on track with our action plan items. I have one coming to council this afternoon for an update. So we've completed some of them. We updated our parking requirements for affordable housing. We updated our housing policy for public hearings for affordable housing projects. We have a project undergo to form a partnership with a local housing nonprofit. And they actually came and presented, that's what these images are on the side. They came to present concept plans for municipally owned land.
The Birch project?
The Birch project, yeah.
Second one.
Yeah,
The second one,
Yeah,
okay. Now
yeah, this one is on that land sort of just across the street here, not down by the fire hall. Yeah.
I'd love to know a little bit more about that in a second.
we have a project going with Urban Systems to do a DCC bylaw that Karen is leading up. And yeah, I've just been completing our annual reporting. It's due in early March. Our first year, we were actually ahead of target with our units, like our permitted units. But I would worry that we are at risk of slipping, I would think, in future years, just because just with the construction costs and interest rates, it's like we aren't seeing the permit numbers just for market housing that we've seen in the past. So that's a potential point. We're going to apply to actually add a new initiative to our HAF when I do the annual reporting, which is an I&I program in our Sun Cove sewer. So inflow and infiltration, with a goal that if we could do that, then we would actually have additional capacity in our sewer system, and we could allow more units to be added. So it's something that CMHC encouraged us is like, is there a project we could add that would help allow more units? And that was one that we identified. So we're trying to get some stuff from Urban Systems, like an estimate of the number of units we could potentially add. We'll be applying to add that as an initiative.
Want to add one more thing because it kind of goes into this whole idea of housing is the short-term rental enforcement. So we have applied for short-term rental enforcement grant, seeking about 250,000 for that. And what we'd use the money towards would be to have enforcement, given the geographic spread of how Bowen is constructed. It's kind of challenging to go out and see these places. And so this would be more proactive enforcement of the short-term rental bylaws. So that's and we have a list of items we've asked for in that grant application. So that also indirectly supports housing.
And that was directly as a result of your newsletter. So we get something in our agenda in terms of correspondence, and it was like, call it ahead, ask whether or not there's any possibility. The staff look at it, they decide that it's a really tight timeline that they can do it, and they put in a request or an application. So that's good feedback on your newsletters.
Well, that is great feedback, and I'm glad there's some useful information in there. And that's what we try to do. We try to make sure that.
I think that's happened 2 or 3 times now.
Yeah.
Since I've been on.
It's the newsletters and your specific letters about specific programs as they're opening up, and those are really helpful.
Thanks for being here. I have a bunch of right to a healthy environment kudos to send your way as a federal government. And
could we finish up with the HAF?
yes, sorry,
first?
I was just introducing the fact that I've got other things we didn't talk about an agenda. But do you have any advice for us for as you go around talking to different communities and with all the experience and staff you've got talking to you, we're coming into a time, it looks like, of tariffs and uncertainty, chaos south of the border. As we're trying to accelerate housing on an island with ferry challenges and all that kind of thing, do you have any suggestions for us, or later if you can point us to any tools that might be useful? Not that we're not used to it, this kind of uncertainty, but even more.
Yeah, well, it's actually I had a very similar conversation with the Sunshine Coast Regional District on Saturday. Because when you're talking about tariffs, I think at the community level, you want to do what you can to buy Canadian. You're also potentially subject to tariffs that could increase the cost of procurement and things like that. So I know there's things that we're doing federally right now, and I think right now we have the threat of tariffs. We don't actually have the reality of tariffs. I just would say that bringing in those types of measures is normally the prerogative of Congress. The only way the president can do that is under national security grounds, which the case with Canada is incredibly flimsy. And so should you decide to move ahead with that, it would likely be challenged in court very quickly, and an injunction would probably be brought in on those. So I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't know exactly how that might turn out. Canada is preparing retaliatory tariffs. We've had some that we announced that we would definitely bring in effect, and then we were doing consultation on the others. It is really important for the federal government and myself just to be aware of if there are things on that list that might become an issue for driving costs higher for municipalities, because those are the things that we want to avoid as much as possible. We want to have a maximum impact on the US, but a minimal impact on Canadians. So that's something we're definitely keeping in mind, and something I'll be working very closely with the province on as well. But I would also encourage to connect with with your MLA in the province as well on that, just to make sure that we can coordinate as best as possible. I mean, the other part of the threat of tariffs is you are seeing now some of the very frustrating interprovincial trade barriers that we've had since we became a country 150 plus years ago are starting to be brought down. And so there was an announcement on Friday that half of the remaining federal interprovincial trade barriers were removed. There is major progress right now being made on having freedom of movement for labor across the country. The other one that is there's a lot of progress being made is on if you have a product certified to be used in one province or territory, it'll be able to be used in all. So those three areas are going to have the biggest impact on reducing that, which could mitigate a lot of the impact of potential tariffs on just making Canada one market rather than 13. So those are all things that are taking place, but certainly I'd love to continue working together on making sure that any of those costs aren't going to disproportionately benefit or impact communities, particularly communities like Bowen, which is an island, and where the cost of building things like infrastructure especially are more expensive.
Yeah, thank you.
So
That's helpful. Thank you.
So back to housing. I'm understanding there's an issue with DCCs with some recent federal if you get a federal grant, you've got to scratch your DCC program. Corinne mentioned that.
Yeah, I could.
CEO mentioned that.
Councillor Morris is specifically referencing the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund, which is the first phase intake that's being managed federally. So this fund offers 50% grant contribution to municipalities. But the catch is if you are part of a metro that's over 300,000, that metro needs to free DCCs. And so when you look at the monetary implication for Metro Vancouver, they make far more from DCCs than they would from a grant funding opportunity, and one that's not guaranteed. If you apply, you don't know if you're going to get it. So they're unlikely to freeze their DCCs under that scenario. On Bowen, we only really benefit from the parks. That parks DCCs are the only ones we collect on behalf of Metro. And so what? Excuse me?
We have a Parks DCC ourselves.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And so that's the only one that would affect us, but we want to propose alternative measures on how to deal with the DCC aspects. So I know there's been some discussion. Minister Fraser at one point was looking at removing the DCC freeze requirement. But then they went back and they put that back in place. So I'm just I think it's just a question to see if there's firstly, are you looking at this issue with the DCCs? Is there any chance that alternative solutions would be accepted? And the other part of that is, will there be a phase 2 to this program that's administered through the province with less conditions and a higher contribution percentage, like say 75% as opposed to 50?
Well, first, I can't speak for the province on a phase 2 of this, but in terms of the DCC aspect, the rationale behind it is we didn't want to disproportionately tax new development, particularly for things that would be provided for all residents. And so the escalating DCCs, particularly in a number of jurisdictions in Metro, we're going quite high, and that was having a big impact, which was one of the reasons why it actually became a pretty salient issue when we were talking about the Housing Accelerator Fund for a number of the Metro Vancouver municipalities. I'll have to talk to, because we now have a new Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities that was appointed in December. I haven't had a chance to have this conversation about alternatives on this. My understanding is the freeze for DCCs was for 3 years. So it's not a permanent freeze, but the main focus is on making sure that, particularly when we're talking about issues like interest rates and cost of building going up, that we wanted to limit the additional cost pressures we're putting on new development, so we didn't slow things down too much, which is why it's a 3-year freeze and not a permanent freeze. But in terms of alternative measures, I can take that back, but I'd be curious about what type of alternative measures the Bowen Island municipality is looking at for that, and just so I can have a more substantial conversation on what may or may not be acceptable from that point of view.
Yeah, I could email that information to your staff afterwards, so you can take a look at it. It's kind of preliminary at this point, so I don't want to disclose it publicly, but I think once we have it nailed down, we can provide those alternatives to you for review. And if they look reasonable, then hopefully they get chaperoned.
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. The whole point of this fund is we want to provide the infrastructure to enable rebuilding. And so, understand the DCCs are one of the main ways of paying for that. This fund is to make sure that we can support the new infrastructure that's there. So I can't speak for what the minister will accept, but he's a very pragmatic person. So I'm happy to have that conversation with him based on information we can talk about offline.
Okay, I think that sort of fill in where we are with the HAP. And have you got any other grants that we're working on that came from the federal government that we should update on?
No, I think our CAO mentioned our infrastructure grant that we're working on, and the short-term rental grant we've applied for. So, yeah.
Oh, those are 2 applications that we have going in or in.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'll look into where things are at with the STR rental enforcement grants. But I am curious if we could maybe spend a couple minutes talking about the Birch project, because I'm aware of the first phase.
Yeah.
I'm not as aware as the second phase here, which is exciting. It sounds like it's using some sort of municipal land. There are
the triangle down Mount Gardner Road here, just when you went down past the school, it's on your left.
We could ask our planner.
So it's sort of out. That's what I was thinking.
Sure. So it's what we call Lot 1 as a community land. So it's one of the set of parcels we bought from Metro Vancouver in 2005. And we rezoned it a couple council terms ago, 2017 or 18, for a variety of uses, including housing. And then what this council did is tasked Birch, is along with a developer called Tomo is the name, and they've done a co-housing project in Vancouver previously and now own land on Bowen and are interested in Bowen. Anyway, so tasked them with producing implementation plan for lot one based on the zoning that was put in place. And so they came to present to council last week with sort of what they see as a development proposal for the site. Yeah, and sort of working in concert is this direction from council to enter a partnership agreement with Birch. So Birch is like a small volunteer organization that sort of has cobbled together, you know, a successful development proposal on their first phase, largely on volunteer work, and also I think a seen as BC funding grant. So the partnership agreement is to essentially fund their staff, so that they're able to do the sort of pre-development work on the project. And what's been proposed essentially is a 3-year term for that. So using the half funding to fund their partnership agreement so that they're able to put together the development plan, gain, you know, whatever grants are available to actually develop the land, with a move towards making them sustainable going forward without the need for municipal funding. Yeah, I think what else to say on this one? Like they came with the development proposal. They had reached out to some people in the community about it and some of the local developers as well, I think, because some of the challenges are just like anywhere on Bowen. It's like terrain and it's servicing and it's, you know, we have challenges with both our water and our sewer in Snow Cove at the moment. So looking at on-site septic. Yeah, I'm not sure what else I should add about that.
And this presentation was made at our last council meeting, so there's a set of slides from the presentation in the council agenda. Online.
We'll have a look at that. And that's great to hear. I know Squamish is using some of the half funding to support their Squamish Community Housing Society. And it's made a big difference. They've been able to secure a couple grants, just having that core operational funding in place. And there's a lot of programs right now that are available, whether that's, you know, if you're using municipal land, I think CMHC has programs like the Affordable Housing Funds can be looked at, you know, and also the province and now the federal government have agreed on the BC Builds program. That could be an option for something like that. So there is a lot of funding from senior levels of government that could be leveraged for that kind of work. So I think it is a really, you know, encouraging time to be looking at that right now.
Thank you. Any more questions that are housing related? And
I had a very interesting meeting on Saturday morning with Tim and a couple of other people in the community that are also working with Birch that didn't come into the presentation in terms of whole new technology. So 3D concrete building on the exterior walls and some other things that can be imported into the island and developed so that there's, you know, some sort of light industry, sustainable economy kinds of things and used for, that would save us a huge amount. If we just did the concrete alone, that would save us a huge amount of transportation costs and bringing the big trucks over and all that, and having to have the whole landscape flattened out so that we can build traditionally. And they estimate that their costs are 2/3 of what the traditional build is. So that's, I think, something that they've been working hard in terms of getting a larger group together from Birch and from the Muni and from their partners. So I think that's something that came out of that presentation in terms of wanting to highlight that they've been working with Birch as well, and that they wanted to make sure that Tim and I understood that they were very much interested and concerned. So it was really very inspiring in terms of where this could take off. So
that sounds interesting but we do have a company on island that places concrete.
exactly.
So
Yep.
we don't have to.
Yep.
Try that. So
There's other groups they've got about 9 people that are interested in 9 different companies that are interested, from wastewater to, you know, a bunch of new technology. So it could be potentially quite interesting. And I think the expansion of the group is going to be also to our benefit.
I'm sure most of you were going to say something at the same time. Councilor Pass, okay.
Just on the innovation front, co-ops came up during this presentation as well. And it sounds like Birch is really open to the idea, and they were suggesting that there may be funding available through federal funding streams as well for co-ops and co-housing kinds of co-ops in particular. Anyway, just that we're looking at all kinds of options, and it's exciting to see personally, as somebody who has lived in it and been part of a housing co-op in Edmonton years ago, it's exciting to see them.
We do have the co-op down the way that,
We have a seniors co-op that's
Seniors
over
co-op.
20 years.
but that, and then the co-op legislation disappeared and now it's been reactivated.
Mhm. Yeah, so we had funding that was passed in budget 2023. And that was announced at the Treasury Board and announced last year. Blanking on the national co-op organization, but they're the ones that are administering it right now. It's the first major investment in co-ops in, I think, about 30 years.
Yeah.
So it's it will help fund some new co-ops and the maintenance of existing ones. Certainly, there's a lot more that can be done in that space. I think, unfortunately, it's something that the conservatives call Soviet style housing, and they're not very supportive of it. But there, it might be something for Birch to look at.
Yeah, I think they're keeping an eye on it.
So it's
From what I
not
gather.
CMHC then, it's the National Housing Co-op Organization.
Yeah, so they're the ones that are administering the fund, and so it was passed in the budget in 2023, and
Yeah.
I'd have to look at the details of it, but my understanding is it's being managed by that organization.
Okay.
Great, I'll look it up.
So on to other things we've been doing. Are there any programs out for planning for things like extensions to our multi-use path and things like that? Not the actual construction, but the planning stages.
Yeah, so there's two parts of the active transportation fund. So there's the planning part of it, and then there's also the capital part. I know the capital stream of the funding is actually open for applications right now.
We have one that we're putting in, correct? Yes.
So I believe it closes by the end of this week. So
I think it's on our agenda today.
I think we're approving the application today.
So please let me know when that's the case. I'd be happy to write a letter
Yeah.
of support for that. So I'd have to look to see what type of, if the thing part of that fund is open for applications right now. I know, for instance, it's funded some planning on the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah.
For that needs to be done there. But that's the main program that we have for that right now. The other thing I'll mention is last year we launched the Canada Public Transit Fund. It's got a few overall streams. It's got metro regional agreements that hopefully we can come to an agreement very soon with TransLink on. We have baseline funding to keep the capital for existing transit lines. And then there's also targeted funding for things like the Active Transportation Fund, the Rural Transit Solutions Fund, and other smaller programs. So with that funding passed, there's going to be about $3 billion each year that's available in those three streams. And so if it isn't open right now, that funding will be, or those applications be open going forward for projects like this. If it's not open right now, or if there's some need for some further work before submitting that.
So Councillor Getty, what was that application that you worked on?
Rural Transit Enhancement Fund or whatever.
And that was
Third word's wrong, but
fund?
I meant to ask Drew before we came in if he'd heard anything back from that, but you had given us a very good letter of support for that. Nice, strong one, but that was the planning section of what was available last year on the rural transit. Did you hear anything, Tim? Tim, have you heard anything?
No, I haven't heard anything.
So staff was to contact, so we don't know
I
where
don't
to,
believe we've heard an update on that.
so no, yes, no, no. So it's still possible.
Yeah,
So,
let me look into that and get back to folks.
great, thank
So
you.
what you're just referring to is more money put into both aspects of both active transportation and rural transit?
Yeah, so the the public transit fund, the idea behind it is so much of whether it's transit or active transportation planning. You know, you want to know that the money is going to be there long term, so you can plan accordingly and do your procurement that way. And so as part of that, there is funding for these more targeted programs. And so that will be there for the active transportation and rural transit solutions fund.
Oh, good. Thank you. We'll get you some more applications.
Yeah, and then the funds for over 10 years. So it'll be $3 billion available every year. There may be more added down the road, but you'll at least know that there is that funding there.
Is that sort of funding available for the Green Line project? Or is it only available?
It's only available for government, with the exception of the Rural Transit Solutions Fund. So that can be used for a private operator, for instance, that sometimes is better served, particularly in some very rural areas where it may be difficult to set up a public system. But there are other, for instance, for Green Line, they're able to leverage the federal clean tech investment tax credit, which is about which will cover 30% of the cost of their procurement. And they're able to use that to procure from a Richmond-based company called Corvus, which is going to supply the electric engines for the ferries. So that will be a big part of it, but that's a private operation, and I understand they've developed a business model that I think will be competitive with that investment tax credit. I think there's a few things they need to sort out. I'm not sure exactly where things are at with the docking location on Bowen. I know they're having discussions with the Harbor Authority in Gibsons, and hopefully there's going to be a decision made very soon on the dock in Vancouver.
Lots of balls in the air. And I think Councillor Jurgensen was mentioning some of our local organizations got some grant funding that we should.
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
I feel like, I just wanted to acknowledge and thank your office for several of our community organizations received grants through the New Horizons for Seniors program, NHSP. Want to say thanks on behalf of our community.
Well, I very much appreciate it. I think it's a great program. You know, it's used in a lot of different ways to support nonprofits that are doing work to address social isolation for seniors. And, you know, there's things like sometimes as simple as building a heat pump in a Legion. Other ones are programs to bring seniors together to discuss or tackle issues related to dementia. So it's a pretty broad program. And, you know, given that we are online here, if there are any organizations that have ideas, this is a program that's available every year, grants of up to $25,000. So, you know, I want to make sure that those opportunities on Bowen are seized for sure.
So we've gotten several of them in the past, so.
Speaking of grants that are available every year, we benefit from the Canada Summer Jobs grant, and the more support put into that program, the better it is for municipalities to want to hire summer students to help with the parks crew or various other things that need to happen in the community.
The library. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Visitor center.
Yeah, no, it's another great program where you can hire young people for months of May through August and find a deserving organization that can provide quality work experience for a young person. I think it's especially important right now when you're seeing youth unemployment tick up. That it's a good program. You know, during COVID, the funding for it actually increased significantly. It's gone back to regular levels since then. The funding that's allocated is based on the demographics of a particular riding. So it's always oscillating a little bit from that point of view. But I know how important that is for especially nonprofits, but you know, sometimes for-profit organizations as well to get some assistance and do some great work in the summer.
So based on demographics, do you mean if we've got a large sort of over 15 to 20-ish population, then we'll get more than a similar sized community that might have very little of that population.
Precisely.
Okay.
Can we use BC Ferry numbers in terms of tourists in the summer?
Well,
Population seems to.
this is based on the census and because I know, and it's a bit frustrating because you look at what the population is on Bowen in the summer, the same thing for places like Gambier, Sunshine Coast, the population sometimes almost doubles. So it's not necessarily the best measure of the amount of youth you have in a particular area, but fortunately that's the criteria that they use right now.
Has anybody else got any topics they'd like to raise?
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge the support that we've had through the derelict vessels and damaged beach debris kinds of projects that we've been able to find funding through. And I know on our agenda, council agenda today, Bonnie Brokenshire went to Ottawa to present to the committee, Ocean Fisheries and Oceans Committee, and as I think others did from around the Sunshine Coast and area, but that's been really helpful just over the years. And also we've got eelgrass coming back and there's sea lions now in various spots around the island. So it's just terrific to see the whales from the ferry and to feel the healthy environment coming back. And I just have a couple of things you might like to know about what's been happening here on Bowen. We now have a memorandum of understanding with the Bowen Island Conservancy, so that there's a whole bunch of biodiversity planning going on in terms of aligned with the 30% by 2030, but this is more about how do we do the detailed planning in our small scale kind of, we don't want to lose any species here because we have the saltwater moat around us. And I'm sharing that with Trustee Getty here. We're on Islands Trust, and so we coordinate a little bit with Kate Wees and others who are involved as elected folks on Islands Trust as well, to preserve and protect. So that's great. And any other grant support for those kinds of projects? I know we're getting some of that through the Islands Trust Conservancy as the Section 11 grant for species at risk and that kind of protection work. But you know, we've got a conservation and development policy now. Nature needs half here on Bowen, and so any rezoning, that's so far it's just a policy, but we've also got an OCP update underway, and site alteration bylaw. We've got a bunch of new things that have sort of come on in the past 8 years, like 2018, our parks plan, and you know about our license of occupation for Manion Bay. And then a bunch of updated bylaws like the 2016 use of beaches and water areas, and that's now public places bylaw, pesticide control bylaw, outdoor lighting at night sky. That's an old one that is just for municipal so far, but you know, I think it would be interesting to know if there's any well, I won't take us off into satellites and things like that, but I just want to let you know that those kinds of things are happening, and I support it's great that you're doing the use path support, because that helps us be more of a walk-on island, which is what Green Line ferries may help with as well, in terms of helping with the ferry congestion and all those things, as well as affordability and ability for people with disabilities to get around, on mobility scooters, for example, going up the hill. Anyway, so just a little bit about the environment we're trying to protect and preserve as part of the Islands Trust. And as part of the Islands Trust, we have also I've been working with the 30 by 30 project, trying to encourage the kinds of interactive planning with new technology and community input, like is happening with the Marine Guide for Howe Sound, using that as a bit of a model for how we might do that through the islands. So we've asked staff Islands Trust has asked staff for some of that, so just to let you know, as part of that bigger thing, that those kinds of supports are appreciated and we're trying to do some new things.
Very exciting to hear a lot of that work, and you know, some of which I've been aware of some time, like the license of occupation for Mannion Bay, and it was great to have Bonnie Barkleshire and Ian Wen come speak to as witnesses for the study we're doing on abandoned and derelict boats on the Fisheries and Oceans Committee. Unfortunately, with prorogation, that study was ended, but we had some really good testimony on things that we need to do to better tackle that issue. But good practices like Mannion Bay is one that I really wanted to highlight of, you know, where other communities could look to similarly find ways of addressing that issue. There, you know, that does come along with some cost for municipalities. So that's something that wanted to get home to folks in Transport Canada and Fisheries and Oceans. And we do have a new provincial minister that's for waterland and resource stewardship, who's constituent on the Sunshine Coast, that's leading the province's work on 30 by 30. And I know from speaking with her, there's a lot of big protected areas that are making some progress on right now, working with the funding from the nature agreement that was signed almost 2.5 years ago now. So there's definitely some funding there. Always curious if there are particular species at risk that you know, additional funding would be helpful in addressing. I know things like invasive species like the European green crab in Halcatsimau Sound is an issue, and sometimes working with the invasive species councils on where we can better tackle that issue. And then last thing I just want to mention, you mentioned the bylaws with respect to light at night. Mm-hmm. I know one of the things that the district of Seashell is looking at right now is becoming a dark sky community. Part of the benefit from that is it allows the astronomers that are there to have better line of sight in the stars. And so one thing to look at, I know that's something that they're looking at very closely right now. Could actually drive some tourism, as well as be an opportunity for residents to better be able to see that. Anyways, won't go too far down that road.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just to provide a little context on the dark sky, they'd historically always been dark sky and did that in their engine. I think this is just a way to formalize what they have already been doing for many years there. So yeah, there's no lights here.
My neighbor's got a couple.
We had a dark sky bylaw quite early.
Yeah.
But just for municipal lands. And however, there's a lot of, well, we'll see what happens in the OCP update.
Yeah. Yeah, we are in the process. We've just started the OCP update, and Daniel's department is leading it, and we've got a meeting tomorrow, and then the House on to Ketchum and the biosphere is, I think, been very good, and so that's getting some federal funding to support it. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So once it became a biosphere, if there was 3 or 5 year funding, I forget exactly what it was, but it funds the work that they're doing on other effective conservation measures.
Oh, yes.
And so they have that regular funding that's there each year. They did receive some additional funding. There's Environment and Climate Change Canada had additional funding before year end that they were able to receive as well. But they do have that annual funding that they can rely on as well.
And then the Oceans Protection Plan program, and that's been, the funding's been extended for that, and it's carrying on. And they've been doing a very interesting series of webinars on various different topics, and those have been very interesting to attend every Thursday morning.
Couple of points, I guess. I know that the OCPSC has a very long meeting tomorrow. I'm wondering if we've got any more questions to tie up Daniel's time.
We'll let him go.
He's got a busy day tomorrow. And I have some issues with respect to, you mentioned briefly the international scene, and I'd like to dig into that a little bit if I can.
So do we have any more issues? So we can see our manager planning, get back to preparing for tomorrow?
Yeah, just one thing before Daniel leaves, because it might apply, but I just want to stress that we've made some strides in terms of our First Nations reconciliation. We've recently renamed a few beaches and continue to foster and grow the relationship. I know sometimes they have a capacity issue on their. I don't know if that it's kind of show up that there's just capacity, but we're trying to be working on fostering that relationship, and we have some good stuff coming forward on disaster and emergency management. We have an exercise with them coming up this next month, or maybe this month, and then next month on trying to build relationships. So yeah, that's been coming along well too.
That's great. This is with the Squamish Nation?
Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, I'd have to look into that. I don't know so much what type of capacity funding there might be for things like, you know, we're talking about renaming of different areas. I'm not aware of anything, but there might be something with respect to emergency preparedness that's there. And obviously we got a reminder of that last week of things that we need to be prepared for. But that's something I can take back and look into.
Or even if it's offsetting the costs of Squamish members to come and be a part of our OCP process, you know, some things like that might go a long way.
Just on the reconciliation and marine planning side, as part of my being apt to be the Ocean Watch Action Committee person through the Howe Sound Community Forum. I'm sitting in on a what's now called the Marine Planning Circle, which now includes staff from both Squamish Nation and Tsleil-Waututh. Because we're all of us communities that are concerned with the Alketsa and Burrard Inlet, all the marine environmental quality objectives and biodiversity kind of things. So the marine planning guide, you know, the big GIS map, the interactive map with input from everybody. And we're just forming a circle to try and figure out how we can work together. I'm sort of sitting there more with an Islands Trust hat on than a municipal hat, because Islands Trust has some jurisdiction over marine. But just to let you know, that also is encouraging to me from a reconciliation standpoint, that it's a place where we can sit around, circle amongst each other. I think both Squamish Nation and Tsleil-Waututh in particular are doing amazing things in terms of planning for reclaiming ocean health. So anyway, very excited.
And I guess one federal thing was we just cleared the Radar Hill, so that for the Coast Guard, they just finished a project up there,
Okay.
clearing lines of sight for the radar towers.
I was not aware of that. So.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
if you've been driving sort of around the curve when you get off the ferry and you look to the right, especially when the snow was there, you would have seen a big white patch, and that's what it is. So
It's to enhance marine safety, not just the radar, the line of sight radar, but all the microwave cameras and all the fancy technology that can be used to better get ready for increasingly wild winter weather, and maybe LNG tankers or whatever else is going to come down in the future. So it's Coast Guard took down a whole bunch of trees. We got some comments about logging is happening. I'm going, well, hang on. This is more about clearing and technology changes. Anyway, so that's recent. We can send you a newsletter on that if you want.
Please do. Yeah.
Okay.
but if you have an extra little time on boat to drive up there, that now there is an absolutely fabulous view
Okay, yeah.
where there used to just be trees.
Well, I guess like a silver lining there, right?
So there's a positive and a negative.
So if you can just pass along the municipal newsletter, yeah, thank you.
Anybody else got any?
Do we excuse Daniel?
Oh, yeah, I thought you were going. Sorry.
Thanks, Daniel.
See you tomorrow.
We'll see you later.
Before you go on to another topic, you mentioned international concern. So we've had threats of tariffs and the big faucet from Canada for water. And the whole business about, I guess it was Prime Minister Trudeau's open mic with respect to power metals. We just had a speaker here on the weekend who'd written about a book about power metals. So it was, all of these potential issues that raising everybody's anxiety levels. There's also all of the stuff that went on last week and the American behavior at Brussels and in Germany and all that. The German election, which was successful in some ways, but had quite a significant increase in the far right party, which was concerning. And also, we had a breakdown with BC Ferries with respect to point of sale systems failing. I'm not sure if that was this morning or yesterday, but it raises the issue in terms of just how vulnerable we can be when there's interruptions that seem minor in some ways, but could be potentially much more. And then the earthquake, in terms of just preparations and, where do we go to get information and support and help and ideas and some idea of just some sense of what the feds are planning in terms of dealing with all of the turmoil and the anxiety. Not just in terms of a federal election coming up, but just, what do we have to pay attention to at a local government level? And, we're a small island and we've got this moat around us. And we're relatively self-sufficient, although when the ferry went out for 3 days, we, started gaining shelf space, I suppose. But, what do we have in terms of resources and where can we go to sort things out? There's just too much media, I guess misinformation is the best word that comes along, but it's, I know that people are very concerned and it's, if there's some way that we can interact in ways of bringing the levels of anxiety down, it's other than the campaigning.
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of things that you mentioned there, and we probably could spend hours going through each of them here, but I mean, can't control the things that are happening outside of our borders. Today is actually the third year anniversary of Putin's illegal and unjustified invasion of Ukraine, and now world leaders, with the exception of the US, are gathering in Kyiv right now to talk about how that resolution looks like. It's not just a negotiation between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. And it is very concerning seeing the American government supporting far-right parties instead of speaking to the actual government in Germany, for instance. And the level of disinformation that's online. And so I think more than ever, it's important for people when they are looking for information to be able to get it from sources like Bowen Island Undercurrent, where you're going to have an editor that's going to look at that, what you're going to be reading is going to be accurate. And I think unfortunately, too many people are relying on social media and they're not getting access to accurate information. It's one of the reasons why we've made a point of trying to make sure that media has the resources to be able to continue to do the work that they do to inform people, and also as a bulwark for democracy, whether that's CBC, whether that's smaller glacier papers, radio, or what have you. And so I think that's a really important part of it. And then to your question about emergency preparedness, we got a reminder of that with the earthquake. One of the things that it did provide a task for is the early earthquake warning system that was actually the first sensor which was installed for that nationally was that in Horseshoe Bay in the Bowen Island, the Horseshoe Bay Ferry Terminal there. So that was the test for that. I'm still looking forward to seeing what the results are, but it provides immediate information for any types of critical infrastructure where that could be at risk. And, you know, it's a reminder of all of the emergency preparedness plans for people to be aware of what those are in each community. And so I'm not sure what the level of communication was for Bowen Island and the province on that, but it's good. But you know, it is something we need to make sure that we can disseminate that information quickly. I know I got information immediately on my phone about what to do. But it's a reminder to make sure that we can connect with constituents very quickly on that to share that information. And ideally getting it somewhere where they know it's going to be the information they need rather than something that might not be true at all.
We've got alertable on which system, which I think we will, have you had a rush of people signing up after? And we do a sort of an open house for emergency preparedness sort of week and things at the fire hall, and I'm guessing we might have better attendance this time around with having had a real incident.
Yeah, actually, like I do a lot of emergency planning as part of that's what I do or one of the things I do for a living down in the States. And here, the emergency planning is pretty robust compared to a lot of places I've seen, like the people that are running it from municipality, the volunteers that are part of it, they're really good. They're really dedicated to it. They're getting the training they need. And most importantly, they're testing the plan. So we're actually going out and seeing, because everybody's got a great plan, right? And then it goes sideways for the shots fired. So I would say that right here, we're farther ahead than most communities in my mind right now. And any support we can get to continue that is going to be really, really useful to us, because this, Councilor Getty said this. Who knows what's next?
We've had a number of grants to fund various
Yeah.
programs, and I don't know whether they're federal or provincial,
Yeah, I don't
where the
know.
money's come from, but those have been very good.
But they're being well spent is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
wherever they
yeah.
come from. It's not being wasted here, so.
And just for my information, is this week for emergency preparedness, is that in May or when is that?
I'd have to check, but Sophie's nodding.
Sophie's
May.
nodding, yeah. It's the
I think
Emergency Preparedness Week, you know.
my understanding is that probably the grants would probably be provincial. Usually the federal role is when the province asks for federal government to come in to support in cases whether that's military or otherwise.
Yeah.
But the first point of contact is always the province. And then if you do have a major national disaster, through the disaster financial assistance arrangements, the federal government will backstop the uninsured losses that are there. So there is that, but we're not the first resort on those measures. We did create what's called the National Adaptation Strategy, which was a way of getting all the different governments and stakeholders to work together on all the different aspects of emergency preparedness. So a lot of that planning has been in place, but typically the main point of contact federally would be the province, which would then connect directly with the municipalities. But it's great to hear that you have a very robust system in place, and if there's anything I could do to help promote that or be of assistance, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Yeah. And with regard to the tariffs and all the other issues that are going on cross border, I attended a webinar put on by FCM last week, and I have quite a number of bits I have to disseminate to everybody, but they're being very proactive and going down to meet with FCM type organizations and counterparts and UBCM type organizations and counterparts in the US, and attending meetings with the provinces when they've gone down. And they had some very good charts and statistics on, you know, interprovincial trade or the trade balance. It's not a subsidy. They're getting good for
Yeah.
what they're spending. But they had some very good statistics. Send those around and I'll copy.
Tariffs or a trade war is not in the interest of either country.
No.
For 38 American states, Canada is their #1 export
Yeah.
destination. And tariffs would drive inflation in the US. That, you know, you're already seeing really high inflation right now. You know, and you look at the proposed trade imbalance, you know, the reason that we export more to the US than we import is because we sell subsidized oil, which, you know, they get at a huge discount and then they refine it and they're able to sell it for a huge profit. And it's similar with other resources. So if you took out oil, the US would have a $50 billion trade surplus. So again, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. And, you know, if you talk to people outside of the White House, pretty much everybody would agree with you. But unfortunately, the decisions are being made in the White House, not necessarily based on any facts or logic. And I know from speaking with colleagues that have traveled to the US from their feedback they've had from speaking with senators and Congress people is that they largely agree with what we're saying and that they just hear about things the same way we do by reading in the news.
Reading in the news or listening, reading tweets or podcasts.
Precisely, unfortunately.
Sorry, but on this, I was wondering if you could speak towards the other trade agreements we have. You know, we have an agreement with Europe. So we have the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So we do have some free trade type agreements with other people. And I think in terms of our infrastructure costs, we can have our consultants do a detailed, you know, component by component analysis of where the steel is coming, for example, for a project, right? It would be good to know in, you know, what we have out there and what our potential alternatives are in the supply chain. You know, if we're faced with a 25%, it's that, but it's also the Canadian dollar being low is also affecting our ability to buy goods and services. And then that's not just a bilateral thing with us and the Americans. It's an international thing. It's even if we're to buy things from Europe, we're doing it with a lower Canadian dollar, right? So there are challenges there. I just wonder if you speak to some of the trade and maybe how that European agreement's going to be shored up or maybe broadened.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So we signed CETA, the Canada-Europe trade agreement. I think it was in 2020 that it got ratified. But we have free trade with over 50 countries in the world. We actually just signed a new free trade agreement a couple of weeks ago with Ecuador to add to that. And so we have all these agreements, and there's lots of opportunity for both for Canadian businesses to be able to export there and for us to be able to procure from as well. And I think to our detriment, we've relied too heavily on the US for a lot of free trade. And, you know, it's obvious why. It's the most easy country to logistically to ship things to. With the US proposing tariffs on Canadian steel, that's a product that it's not as easy for us to find alternative markets for it, but there might be opportunities to sell more within Canada as well. Aluminum is a different story. It's easier to ship that. But we do have access to these agreements, and sometimes working closely, with businesses, it's working closely with the Trade Commissioner Service to find alternative markets that are there. But they are out there. And so I'm not sure what level of communication there is with that service and municipalities, but it is something to look into a little bit more, because I'm not sure how much your Bowen is relying on services and
I was just thinking that hopefully our local chocolatier is sourcing their cocoa beans from
free trade now on that. So you know, they make some of the best chocolate in the world. So
yeah, that's the type of things, like if we have local artisans like our chocolatier, you know, sourcing their supplies, like knowing where they're going to get it at a fair rate and you know, what we have agreements with, I think just having them available to the general public or the business community would be useful, and how they plan, you know, anything that comes forward. It's all still talk, but if it materializes, you know, for them to be prepared.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing that came up in this FCM webinar the other day was sort of those kinds of questions. But also a lot of municipalities are considering bylaws to say buy Canadian only or things like that. And FCM has commissioned their legal counsel to do a report on how that all our various free trade agreements would be impacted by that. So, or, you know, so what our various free trade agreements do say about that sort of thing. So there will be an interesting report coming from FCM on that in the near future.
Well, are just questions around, you know, using Starlink for emergency services, right? That has suddenly become
Yeah.
contentious, right? So,
Yeah.
I don't know what the federal government's position on some of these things are, but these are the conversations that are happening at the municipal level is, you know, do we want to be on X? Do we want to use Starlink or such a thing?
I mean, for both of them, there are alternatives. I mean, there's Blue Sky, which is a very similar application to X. Without the, you know, vile commentary and disinformation you have on X. And, you know, within Canada, we have a service called Telesat, which provides very similar service to Starlink. So there are options there. The federal government is working with Telesat, it's a Canadian-based company. So those are there. I know that in Ontario, they're rethinking the contract they have with Starlink. So those are things that can be done. I think it's wise to get some legal advice from the municipality point of view on bringing in bylaws on buying Canadian, because it's not just vis-a-vis the US, it could impact our World Trade
That's
Organization
what we're gonna do now.
obligations.
Yeah.
But there may be a way of doing that, or finding a way maybe of not disqualifying other companies from other countries, but prioritizing Canadian options that are there.
Just wanted to bring up that at our recent emergency management executive committee meeting, the concept of the Starlink alternatives to Starlink did come up. So that's great. I'll pass the Telesat info along, and or will you do that? Okay, okay, great. And then in the car on the way up, Councillor Jurgensen and I were discussing Facebook and X as the disinformation and whatever. Anyway, turns out two of us here are on Mastodon, which is another alternative, Blue Sky alternative. So I think we should discuss Twitter, and at some point, Councillor Jurgensen has info.
So given service providing, we've done 10 after 12, and we have a council meeting at 1, and we have some lunch for us. So do we need to just, has anybody got anything urgent that we can't just casually chat about over lunch? And so I'll adjourn the meeting now.
I'm just gonna make a plug for the strategic plan. We just updated it, and that's usually a good way to see where the federal government can have some synergies with the communities to look at our public strategy. I think some other themes that you know, whether it's on housing or reconciliation, that you know we can work together on.
And just as we're adjourning, we've designed a lapel pin logo, and it's a deer. So we have one for each of you. So thank you for coming. Tim, I'm sorry we'll have to eat lunch without you.
You probably have that.
Now.
Can I do takeout?
Oh, you wanted to learn. We don't have Uber. Can't have Uber Eats, sorry. Okay. We'll see you